Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring one of the absolute most mentally active placements in astrology, Mercury in the fifth house. If you've ever wondered why some people process passion, art, and romance through a hyper-analytical lens, well, you are definitely in the right place. We're going to break down this fascinating dynamic and see exactly what happens when the relentless logic of the mind tries to govern matters of the heart. So get ready, because we're unpacking the mechanics behind the zodiac's ultimate deep thinkers.
It's a paradox, right? What actually happens when sharp logic collides with romance and creativity? It makes for a deeply stimulating, but yeah, sometimes pretty complicated personality. When that sharp logic hits romance, you're not getting a typical fairy tale. You get a massive collision of two totally different worlds, where passion is literally constantly fact-checked by reason. Imagine trying to solve a complex math equation while you're writing a love letter. That is the exact energy we're dealing with today.
Section 1. Mind meets fifth house. The core dynamic.
First up, let's define our arena here. The fifth house is essentially our astrological playground. It's the domain representing intelligence, creativity, romance, personal expression, and our unique viewpoints. Think of it as the area of life where we just let our hair down to find our passion and our art. It's where we fall in love, paint masterpieces, and express our rawest selves. Naturally, this is a space of warm, flowing, and often entirely unstructured energy. It totally thrives on spontaneity and feeling, rather than strict rules. And then secondly, we have the planetary influence crashing into this playground, Mercury. Now, Mercury brings a completely different, super fast-paced energy. It's the planetary force governing strict reasoning, communication, mental activity, and sharp logic. It's the processor of information, literally the ultimate planet of the mind. Mercury doesn't just want to feel something, It wants to categorize it, label it, and explain it to you in profound detail. It needs absolutely everything to make perfect sense.
So this really brilliantly illustrates the core contrast we're looking at. We're essentially taking cold, sharp logic and dropping it directly into the warm, free-flowing waters of passion and creativity. The emotional flow, traditional to the fifth house, gets suddenly intercepted by Mercury's innate need to dissect, analyze, and communicate. It's kind of like bringing a calculator to a poetry reading. There's this constant tug of war between just surrendering to the moment and needing to intellectually understand exactly what that moment means.
Moving on to Section 2. The Everyday Debater, Communication Styles.
In everyday life, this placement creates a seriously sharp, highly energetic conversationalist. Their communication style is witty, direct, and incredibly critically expressive. They absolutely love debating ideas, even in just the most casual conversations. And there's a really pronounced tendency here to question authority, tradition, or established views. Because they absolutely refuse to accept the status quo without a lively debate, they frequently find themselves in intellectual disagreements over everyday opinions and beliefs. You might say the sky is blue, and they'll happily debate you on the exact shade and the atmospheric science behind it, just for the thrill of the mental exercise.
The crucial takeaway here is that, well, chatting with them is never boring, but that constant mental friction can sometimes boil over. Conversations are highly mentally stimulating and will absolutely keep you on your toes. But because of that relentless analytical energy, things can occasionally become a bit tense, especially if you just wanted to sit and have a quiet cup of coffee. What starts as a simple observation can super quickly escalate into a full-blown philosophical debate. It's exhilarating for sure, but admittedly, occasionally a little exhausting.
All right, Section 3. Romance and mental matches, love and logic.
For this placement, attraction actually starts right in the mind, not the heart. There is a very strong preference for partners or peers who can match their intellectual sharpness. They are seeking a mental equal above all else. Honestly, if you can't keep up with their wit, challenge their ideas, or banter with them at a really high level, the romantic spark might just fail to ignite altogether. A great conversation is the ultimate aphrodisiac here. Physical attraction alone simply is not going to cut it.
Now, there's a pretty fascinating gap here between expectation and reality. The expectation in these relationships is a life filled with frequent, stimulating mental exchanges. They want a partner who acts as a lifelong intellectual sparring buddy. But the reality? Well, that intense desire for deep mental connection can quickly flip into argumentative communication. When two sharp minds clash and perspectives naturally differ, the debate reflex just instantly kicks in, and suddenly a minor disagreement about where to eat dinner turns into a full-on cross-examination.
Which brings us to a really fascinating question about the Achilles heel of Mercury in the fifth house when it comes to love.
Why do misunderstandings arise so easily here, even when the ultimate goal is romantic connection? How does a desperate desire to understand someone so frequently turn into friction?
The culprit is over-analysis. By scrutinizing every single word a partner says, the emotional meaning can easily get completely lost in the logic. They effectively put a magnifying glass over the vocabulary. This means the simple, vulnerable affection behind a statement might be entirely missed, accidentally replaced by an intellectual critique of how it was phrased. A partner might say, "I love how you make me feel," and they might instinctively respond by analyzing the linguistic precision of the word love. The heart just totally gets lost in the syntax.
Section 4. Analytical creativity. Art meets reason.
Unlike those who create purely from raw, unbridled feeling, this placement operates quite differently. Their creative expression is heavily shaped and structured by a deeply analytical mind, rather than just pure emotion. For them, the mind is always acting as the lead director of the creative process. A painter with this placement isn't just throwing paint at a canvas in a fit of passion. No, they're calculating the geometry, the color theory, and the philosophical implications of every single brushstroke.
And this really shows just how deep this planetary influence goes. Decision-making in both creative and romantic matters involves excessive reasoning. Whether they're painting a canvas, writing a story, or planning a romantic date, they apply calculated logic to their choices. Everything is a puzzle to be solved. Seriously, don't be surprised if they bring a carefully optimized minute-by-minute itinerary, complete with contingencies, to a spontaneous date night. It's really just their unique way of showing they care by applying their absolute sharpest tool to the situation.
Section 5. The logical balance. Concluding thoughts.
So the pathway of this placement is incredibly clear. First, it creates a highly mentally active personality. Second, this undeniable mental energy perfectly supports intense intelligence and creativity, producing some of the absolute most articulate and quick-witted people you'll ever meet. But the third step reveals the ultimate risk, the real danger of letting that logic completely extinguish the natural emotional flow. The sharp mind feels brilliant ideas, but relying way too heavily on reasoning can completely stifle the spontaneous joy and vulnerable connection that the fifth house is ultimately supposed to represent.
Ultimately, their world boils down to this core philosophy. Ideas are constantly exchanged and examined. It's a continuous, vibrant laboratory of thoughts, where absolutely everything, from a beautiful piece of modern art to a budding new romance, is put under the intellectual microscope. They don't just want to experience life, they want to thoroughly, deeply understand the mechanics of the experience itself.
So, I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to reflect on as we wrap up. How do we balance the beauty of a sharp intellect with the vulnerability of the heart? Can you harness the brilliance of an analytical mind without letting logic totally extinguish the emotional fire? It's a genuinely fascinating challenge to navigate, whether for anyone with this placement or anyone lucky enough to love them. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and we'll see you next time.